Inside the forest, the company was preparing for battle, because today they had to defeat the enemy, whatever the cost. Its roar was getting closer, and it was too dark around them. The knights had a problem. They couldn't see their enemy, and each time he was behind their allies. The monster did not manage to take the mage by surprise, as the knight was faster and struck down the beast. The elf couldn't believe his eyes and asked the valiant knight why he was there. The boy apologized to the knight for his pranks, because he had saved his life and protected the peace of his tribe. For saving the elf tribe, the elf's affection from the small village increased by 10 points. For this, the hero received his first achievement, a stranger who earned the trust of the elves, for which he could freely move around their lands. The younger sister of the rescued elf turned to the hero and reminded him of his offer to become her companion. She agreed to it, unlocking another achievement, thanks to which it will be possible to use the equipment of the elven race. The townspeople rejoiced, and the hero walked happily, holding the elf by the hand. She was wearing a white dress, and flower petals were falling around her. The young couple got married. The knight looked into the elf's eyes, and she looked into his, and both were immensely happy. As they kissed, another achievement was accomplished. He became the first foreigner to marry an elf. It was a presentation on the screen, and the man on the podium revealed that he had spent countless hours racking his brains over it, saying that Ares was not just a game. All the characters in it were fully fledged AI that made decisions based on their personalities. People were amazed by what they saw. No one could believe that this was real gameplay. Thanks to the introduction of super artificial intelligence, a divine being was born. The god Ares himself evaluated the players and granted them special abilities for their achievements. Players would achieve nothing if they clung to their usual routine. Anyone could become a hero, covered in the glory of legends, or gather their own army and rule like a king. In other words, everything they could achieve in real life was available in Ares. And even more, what was impossible in reality became a reality in Ares. The public rejoiced. People wanted to buy Ares as soon as possible. In 2045, the game Ares was developed by Purium Kommer Ltd. The reaction to the virtual game created by the genius Lee Si-jin was explosive. It influenced not only the gaming industry, but also global culture as a whole. The number of players exceeded 1 billion overnight. A year later, players were in the starting zone of Ares, a village for players from levels 1 to 10. When you enter Ares, your real physical data and abilities are transferred to the game, allowing you to change only your appearance. The event, which has been going on since the game's launch, is to break a wooden dummy in 10 hits. They say that 1.2 billion people have already tried to complete this trivial event, and all have failed. If you succeed, you will receive a VIP capsule worth 50 million won, and 5 points to all your stats. The guy thought that 10 blows would be enough to break it. The person next to him added that there were almost no takers now anyway. After the members of the national teams failed, and even the gold medalist Hanil couldn't do it, now everyone thinks it's impossible. The guy was curious why no one even wanted to try. The reason was today, because this is humanity's last real hope. The townspeople were afraid of the man, whose size exceeded that of the others. His name was Madosuk, the strongest of the primates. Madok, looking angry, asked those around him if it was a stuffed animal that even Kanil couldn't break. According to rumors, the strongest of the primates had managed to kill a bear with his bare hands, and next to him, the dummy seemed insignificant. Confident of his success, Madosuk struck the dummy to get the VIP capsule. The dummy flew back a whole meter, but its appearance did not change at all. The game administrators watched what was happening, hoping that he would succeed. After all, they didn't want to hear any more angry phone calls. If Madosuk failed after Kanil, a huge scandal would erupt over the authenticity of this event. They would say that they had created an impossible quest for the sake of hype. People would say that Ares was only thinking about how to recruit players and squeeze more money out of them. The man believed that they would have to interfere with the system for the first time, but they weren't sure if the director would agree to it. The assistant said that Beller should take care of it, but he wasn't sure of himself. But while they were deciding what to do, Madosuk had already taken his 10th blow and fallen to his knees, failing the test with the dummy. The assistant suggested that Baylor leave the office before they were inundated with complaints, and that he treat her to dinner at the same time. As they discussed their plans for the evening, they were interrupted by another assistant who noticed that a new contender had appeared. But he didn't look trustworthy. He was wearing the standard set given to newbies. He could change it by killing just 10 first-level monsters, but he kept it. The guy's weapons looked like they had been bought, and many had already tried to win with donations, but nothing worked. Discussing the newcomer's appearance, the assistants did not notice that he had drawn his sword. Suddenly they heard a loud noise coming from the screen, and Beller turned around in confusion. He immediately noticed the same guy who had cut the dummy in two with a single swing of his sword. This was the first player to destroy the wooden dummy. His stats began to rise, and his fame grew. The assistants and Baylor were shocked by what they saw. Belhair wanted to know who this young man was, because apart from Madosuk, no one else had such outstanding abilities. No matter how much the administrators watched the guy, he seemed like the most ordinary person. Beller noticed something and abruptly asked his assistant to check the rank of the stranger's sword. But the result was very strange. Beller thought so, because it would be much stranger if this sword were ordinary. The sword was called Daylight, and its rank was epic. The creator had no restrictions on it, but for everyone else, the sword was only available from level 40. Learning that this sword was epic raised even more questions about the guy's identity and who he really was. In the main character's memories, he most vividly remembered the ringing of metal and the flames that seemed to burn everything around him. His father was a blacksmith, a man standing over a furnace and forging pieces of metal, striking an anvil with a hammer. The guy thought his father had finally returned. Hugging his dad from behind, he promised to protect him. The man turned around, his eyes burning. He began to sob and said that he was still burning, noticing how hot it was around him. The boy fell to the ground, unable to touch his father, only begging him to get out of the fire. It was all a nightmare. The main character's body was covered in sweat, and it wasn't the first time he had had this dream. In the lobby of the Oo Hospital in Seoul, South Korea, the guy was sitting at a table, staring intently at his tablet. With a smirk on his face, he wondered why these fools were still hoping for something. It was impossible to break a wooden doll with force alone. The guy came to meet Kim Chi-hoon, who was happy to see him. But the dissatisfied stranger reminded him that he had asked not to be called to meetings during the day. Kim Chi-hoon didn't know what else to do, because he was always busy with his evening shift and wasn't allowed to visit his father in the hospital. The guy sat down in a chair and asked Kim Chi-hoon what he wanted. Kim asked his companion if he was hot. Lowering his mask slightly to reveal his face and hand, which were covered in scars, he asked Kim if he was tired of living. Apologizing, the guy decided to get down to business, took out his tablet, and asked if his friend had heard of Ares. It was currently the most popular game with cool AI. There was an event for newbies in this game that no one had passed yet. All the best players had failed. Kim Chi-hoon offered to complete this event, for which he would receive a VIP capsule for the game worth 50 million won. The main character was embarrassed because, according to Kim Chi-hoon, 1 billion people had already failed, and they would not be able to do it either. Kim understood that it would not be easy, but among all the possibilities, the guy had a chance to defeat this wooden dummy. To achieve his goal, Kim got a standard capsule for Ares, which cost a whopping 10 million won. They say that standard capsules have an 85% synchronization rate, which is quite enough for the game. The guy didn't understand why there were so many people in Ares, despite the price you pay to play, but he was convinced that it was worth it. If everything went well, the rewards would be plentiful. Plus, you could trade real currency in Ares. Kim suggested that his friend stop talking and try the capsule for synchronization with the game right away. But the main character didn't budge, changing his expression. He wanted to know where Kim got this capsule. Turning back, he said that it wasn't important right now. The main character should have thought about how much they could earn from this. The guy didn't believe in this crazy idea, because he had no guarantee that they would make any money at all. Hitting the capsule, Kim laughed and said that it wasn't a crazy idea, but an investment, and his friend had a chance. According to Kim Chi-hoon, in Ares, there was an opportunity to choose the Blacksmith class for further play. Kim asked Kang Hyun-soo to remember who he was. After all, he was the only son of a world-famous master. Kang was his only heir, and with his skills, a wooden dummy would be the easiest task. The guy understood what Kim was getting at. He took off his cap and asked him if he had shown what happened after the accident. Kang's face was covered in burns. Part of his head had no hair, and his entire face was disfigured. He admitted that he was in no condition to try anything. In his memories, Kang ran with all his might. Everything around him was on fire, but he kept searching. The main character was trying to find his father. The fire was spreading, and his father was under the rubble. Through the pain, Kang managed to pull his father out from under the pile of boards and carry him on his back. That day took everything from the main character. He barely survived, but his father never regained consciousness after the incident. Soon, Khan had to pay for his father's treatment, but neither he nor his family had enough money. To earn at least some money, Khan had to find any job he could. For 10 years, he followed in his father's footsteps. With this hammer, the main character forged countless items. But it all became too much for him, and now the young man could not swing the hammer without remembering the tragedy of his life. After that day, Khan couldn't tense his right arm, let alone forge, and even ordinary work was now difficult for him. Kang put his cap and hood back on. He understood that Kim wanted the best for him, but he had to deal with his problems himself. Before leaving, the guy asked his friend not to throw away 10 million anymore, and it was time to go to his part-time job. Kim thought the main character was an idiot. He was working himself to the bone to pay his father's hospital bills and couldn't keep it up much longer. Kim was also concerned about what Kang was going to do with his own life, because he couldn't just remain crippled for the rest of his life. The treatment cost about 1 billion won, which was a crazy amount of money, but that didn't mean he could just give up. The Kang that Kim knew before wasn't like that. He said he wanted to be a blacksmith his whole life, and now he had the opportunity to become one in Aries. Kim decided to take the unfortunate 10 million for the capsule for himself, asking his friend to listen to him just this once. Chi Hong begged him to try. He wouldn't get in the way anymore, but they had to give Aries a chance. Kang looked at his hand. His face was unreadable, but his hands were shaking violently, revealing his inner emotions. Soon, the main character returned to his work, believing that Chi Hong had filled his head with nonsense. The guy wanted to focus on what he could do now. Thinking about his father, Hyun-soo noticed the man striking metal with a hammer, and he couldn't stop listening to it. Hope began to burn in his eyes, and the loud ringing of metal echoed in Hyun-soo's heart. In the end, he returned to Chi-hun. Although he couldn't do it, the ringing of metal brought him here. Putting on his gaming glasses, the main character couldn't forget the flames that seemed to burn everything around him, and the familiar ringing. The system welcomed him to the world of Aries and began creating his character. First, Kang had to enter a nickname. Kang named himself Hyun-soo inside the game world of Aries, and the system began to customize the character. Flames appeared around him, and Hyun-soo's body began to behave strangely. The system was analyzing his physique. In a split second, the main character's appearance changed. The scars on his body disappeared, and his face was tidied up, completing the analysis. The game offered to undo the changes to his appearance, but Hyun-soo refused and decided to stay with his new look while the game searched for a suitable server. It wasn't just that the scar had disappeared. Hyun-soo had completely regained the strength in his right arm. In order to repay Chi-hoon's debt, the main character wanted to work hard, because now he could pursue his dream. The system summoned the hero to a random area in the beginner zone. Hyun-soo found himself in the lands of Barden, the forge of Lenny. A scrawny man with a beard was sticking metal into red-hot lava, talking to himself, angry at the instructors. To prove the instructors wrong, the man wanted to forge a sword much better than his competitors. The man was overcome with anger and began to swing his hammer mindlessly, as if he could create this sword. The main character went inside the forge and told the blacksmith that the forging process was different. The man suddenly calmed down, but asked Hyun-soo in bewilderment what he had just said. The young man's face was completely calm as he repeated to the blacksmith that he had forged the sword incorrectly. Hyun-soo immediately understood that they were forging the blade, but this method would not make it strong. The blacksmith thought the young man was not from around there, and asked him how he knew this. The main character understood that it was none of his business, but the blacksmith was clearly trying to forge a good sword, and he couldn't just walk away. The man did not think that Hyun-soo knew how to forge, so he handed him a hammer and asked the young man to show what he could do. He wanted to see if the main character could back up his words, noting that he would be watching closely. Initially, Hyun-soo just wanted to befriend the blacksmith and ask to work in the smithy, but this would do as well. The guy immediately said that he had one condition. If he proved that he could do it, he would take the sword he forged. In return, he would show him something worthwhile. The blacksmith laughed, hoping that the main character's confidence would not go away. Sitting down on a bench, the man declared that if Hyun-soo lost the bet, he would pay for his audacity. Agreeing, he set to work. 3 years had passed, and Hyun-soo had made many promises, but he wasn't sure if he still had what it took. But the main character decided not to worry and to give it a try. Inside, he felt that he could do it. With each swing of the hammer, Hyun-soo remembered his father and Chi-hoon's words, but he kept trying. All the forgotten sensations returned, the familiar ringing of steel and the burning heat on his skin. Hyun-soo was happy to be back. As he continued to strike, the main character rejoiced even more, and the metal began to take shape, realizing that his body remembered everything. The blacksmith was surprised by this stranger. He thought that the boy was just clumsily copying what he had seen somewhere, but he understood everything. Watching the boy, the blacksmith thought he had reached his limit, but Hyun-soo was very happy to forge the blade. It didn't matter whether he enjoyed it or not. Only the result was important to the blacksmith. Hyun-soo put everything he had into a single skill. The blacksmith didn't approve of this, but he wasn't going to interfere. The man was not just a master blacksmith in the starting zone, and he hoped that the main character would not get hurt. Suddenly, he noticed something amazing. Hyun-soo hit the sword with the hammer so hard that he bent it. After a couple more blows, the sword returned to its previous state. The blacksmith did not understand what this amazing skill was that increased strength so much. The blacksmith wondered why he hadn't thought of such a basic technique himself. However, it could all end in an instant, and Hyun-soo could be doing it on purpose to impress the man. The master also had the skill to determine the rank of an item. Looking at the steel, it had a C rank, having increased from a D rank. The blacksmith had forged C-rank steel before, but it had never improved so quickly. And then he realized that Hyun-soo hadn't lied to him, but that this was most likely his limit. The man did not believe that the rank of the steel would rise any further, no matter how much he hammered it. Watching him, the blacksmith refused to believe that the young man was better than him, because a couple of cheap tricks wouldn't change anything. It was too late, and the blacksmith dozed off on the bench. Hearing the birds early in the morning, he woke up. Realizing that he had stayed up late because of Hyun-soo, he raised his head and noticed the young man in front of him, who was still forging. The main character had been working on the blade all night long, and there was still a bright smile on his face. Finally finishing hammering the steel, Hyun-soo took the metal and dipped it in cold water. When the main character lifted the steel, it began to shine. The blacksmith saw this and couldn't believe his eyes. After working tirelessly through the night, the guy's work paid off. The steel finally rose to rank B. The blacksmith did not know that such a thing was possible. He had reached rank B without any special skills, but Hyun-soo continued to work on the blade. Clutching his head, the main character finally realized that too much time had passed, and he had overworked himself. The man decided to help with the work too. He took hold of the metal and asked Hyun-soo what he could do to help. Agreeing to this, the two blacksmiths set to work, the man holding the steel while Hyun-soo swung the hammer. While forging, the blacksmith listened to the young man's advice and wrote it down with a smile on his face. Working even harder, they created a miracle. The steel reached rank A, which could be used to create a rare sword. The blacksmith's skill allowed him to determine the rank of items, and he had never seen a magical rank item in his starting village, let alone a rare one. Hyun-soo could forge a unique sword with such high-quality metal, but he was not happy about it. It was still too early to rejoice, as he still had to finish the handle and temper the blade so that it would not break too quickly. The man had never met anyone like Hyun-soo before. The young man revealed that he had loved blacksmithing since childhood. Reminding Hyun-soo of their deal, the blacksmith took out a mysterious stone that glowed green. It was mithril ore. Such a rarity had been a family heirloom passed down from generation to generation. The main character did not know how to react to such a rare gift and asked the blacksmith why he was giving it to him. It was because, thanks to Hyun-soo, the man had learned a lot and wanted to learn even more. Besides, this ore was beyond his skills. The blacksmith wanted to see what kind of powerful sword Hyun-soo could forge from such rare ore. Mithril ore did not exist in the real world, and the main character did not know if he would be able to forge an item from mithril, which he had only heard about in legends. Working with something new was a big risk, but Hyun-soo couldn't pass up such an opportunity. The blacksmith was pleased with the young man's attitude, hoping that he would be able to learn from him. Hyun-soo was only too happy to teach the man new skills. The blacksmith suggested calling him master, but he felt uncomfortable. The blacksmith insisted on the title of master, because age is just a number, but Hyun-soo felt too awkward and almost refused to use mithril. A month later, Hyun-soo finally finished working on the blade and practiced swinging his sword. The Sword of Daylight provided 143 attack power, increasing all special characteristics. This legendary sword was created by the hands of a skilled master, which you would never find in the starting zone. Hyun-soo was at level 1 and had no class. His strength was 33 points, his agility was 37, and his health points were 33. The assistants continued to watch him from the control center. They learned that the guy had entered Ares and immediately went to the smithy, obtained mithril, created a sword, and completed the mission. Beller was amazed. The assistant reminded him that the man should have been working, because he could face demotion. But he just decided to take a break. He asked the assistant if there was any more information about Hyun-soo. The girl was able to find his name and age, 23. He currently lived in a studio apartment and had logged into Ares from his friend's house. Beller was surprised that they already had information about him. The girl revealed that they already knew about what had happened in the arena, and she had simply read the personal data from his application. The application had been received, Hyun-soo had not contacted them, and Beller did not think that the main character would accept it, but he asked that his real identity remain a secret. The assistant also did not understand why Hyun-soo decided to hide his identity, and he did so very insistently. If rumors spread, he would not be able to escape attention in real life, because he was already the center of attention within the game. When the main character finally fought off the players, he came to the training center. The man inside told Hyun-soo to leave, because real monsters were already coming from there, and the guy's first level proved that he didn't stand a chance. His name was Relson, an instructor at the hunting training center. He suggested that the guy catch a couple of rabbits in the area and only then return. The main character was persistent, and the man had to accept him, asking him to take one of the swords in the barrel. Hyun-soo drew his blade and said that if there were no restrictions, he would use his weapon. The young man spent a whole month in the beginner's area, although it usually only takes 3 hours to complete. As a result, his basic stats were off the charts. Most importantly, he had the only epic sword that could be obtained here, but Hyun-soo still did not have a class and was at the first level. Over the years, the man had managed countless craftsmen and apprentices, but even compared to them, what was happening now was absurd. The assistants tried to ask Lee Si-jin if they could leave everything to the will of the god Ares and not interfere, simply trusting him. The assistants also said that the main character was currently in the early hunting grounds of Barden. The man smiled and said that Hyun-soo had no idea that a legendary class offer awaited him. Relson glanced at the boy's sword and was skeptical, because it was a blacksmith's blade, thinking that Hyun-soo had made it. The man began to laugh, because he considered the blacksmith's profession a pitiful waste of the future. The training area was swarming with monsters on 3 sides. One trained swordsman was worth more than any lousy weapon. Relson didn't understand why anyone would choose a profession like blacksmithing and come to him. Relson's sympathy for the instructor dropped by 10 points, but Hyun-soo did not despair. The guy had met people like that in real life, and being a blacksmith was now nothing more than a useless dream. But after trying his favorite craft in Ares, the main character felt that his efforts could finally be recognized. Hyun-soo asked Relson who, of all the swordsmen who had passed through this training hall, was the most outstanding. The reason for this question was the protagonist's next request, as he wanted a task more difficult than that person's. Relson understood that he was rotting away here as an instructor on the hunting grounds, but he had trained countless students and could recognize talent when he saw it. Although this infuriated the instructor, the system reported that he had been provoked, and he agreed. The test began. Relson began to guide the young man and explain that his job was to teach beginners the basics and conduct tests. But for the few who showed real potential, he gave them a special test. The local record was the 3rd stage test. Hyun-soo continued to insist on his own way, and succeeded. The 3rd test was the fast 6th level goblins. These beasts seemed excessively bloodthirsty, swinging their daggers. Relson allowed Hyun-soo to take it, since he insisted on such a reckless challenge. But the punishment would be appropriate. If he failed, Hyun-soo would be banned from entering the hunting grounds for a week. The main character wanted to know if there were any more trials, as his goal was to pass them all until the very last stage. The man was furious because the boy was too careless about his training, testing his mentor's patience. Relson could no longer tolerate it, so he grabbed the chain that controlled the gate to the final stage and began to pull it. The final 4th stage of the test was a single monster. This enemy turned out to be a mad goblin of the 15th level. Almost no one in the world had passed the 3rd stage, and not a single participant in the Ares game had managed to clear the 4th. The goblins did not wait before launching their attack. One of them immediately rushed into battle with a sharp lunge. While the main character was preparing to defend himself, the 2nd goblin immediately flew into the air to attack. But Hyun-soo's face remained calm. After all, it was clear to any blacksmith what was happening on the battlefield. Daylight activated the skill that increased physical attack by 52%, and defense by 38% for 40 seconds. The power of Hyun-soo's blade was many times greater. There was no weapon here that could surpass his sword. As soon as Hyun-soo struck down the first fast goblin, the second finally reached its target. The guy didn't have time to react, and had to take a blow to a dangerous place from the goblin. Relson thought so, and Hyun-soo immediately received a critical hit. He noticed that this was why fast goblins were called the nightmare of beginners. The mentor wanted to mock the main character, saying that he had no skills, but suddenly he fell silent. To Relson's surprise, Hyun-soo survived the critical blow without any problems, losing only 18% of his health. All the time Hyun-soo spent forging weapons also increased his stats, and now his strength and vitality were at their peak. But that wasn't the end, because the real danger was just beginning. The mad goblin began to run for the attack. The monster thrust out its elbow, firing spikes of madness straight at the main character. After taking several spikes to his body, Hyun-soo began to experience symptoms of dizziness and blurred vision. Relson was surprised by the guy's resilience, but believed that this would be his limit in the battle with the strongest trials of the training zone. The main character decided to concentrate and trust the weapon he had created and simply do what he could. The passive skill of the epic rank, Daylight, increased his attack speed by 1/10 of a second, which allowed Hyun-soo to defeat the goblins. With this, he managed to overcome the difference in levels and prove his strength to all who were watching. Suddenly, surprise and a smile appeared on Relson's face. Hyun-soo had done what no one else had been able to do. The mentor began to praise him, saying that the guy's blows looked rough, but each swing revealed the true power of the blade. The main character replied that he simply understood that a blacksmith must be able to wield the weapons he creates. These words made Relson think about what he had said earlier about the profession and his insults about the trials. Noticing the muscles and scars on Hyun-soo's hands, the mentor was convinced that he was looking at a real blacksmith and apologized for his previous rudeness. Relson's sympathy reached its peak, and he had a proposal. The man wanted to say this because he sincerely respected Hyun-soo's talent. Relson asked him if Hyun-soo had thought about becoming a Mad Lord. These words unlocked a quest for the legendary class. Belher couldn't believe his ears. An offer to change his class to Mad Lord, a class even higher than the epic Mad Knight. This offer was very important, but accepting the quest to change classes meant cutting off his path back. The Mad Lord commanded hundreds of Mad Knights. Relson wanted to know Hyun-soo's opinion, because he didn't throw around such offers. But with his talent, the guy could become the king among knights. The main character understood the value of this title, but he was forced to refuse, as his calling was to be a blacksmith, not a knight. Although Relson did not expect such an answer, it brought a broad smile to his face. He called Hyun-soo magnificent. The main character thought he would never pick up a hammer again. But here, in this game, he felt something. It was as if his life as a blacksmith was beginning anew. Hyun-soo received a hidden quest to meet Lord Vance. Relson gave the young man a letter of recommendation, saying that someone worthy of such an outstanding blacksmith would be waiting for him at the Lord's castle. As a reward, he was also given the armor that the Mad Lord once wore. It was broken and had lost its properties, but Relson believed that Hyun-soo would find a use for it. The man continued to motivate Hyun-soo to achieve his goal and do what no one else had been able to do. Belher and his assistant couldn't stop watching the main character. He exceeded all their expectations. On his way, Hyun-soo had to reach the pinnacle of blacksmithing, becoming a blacksmith god. The training ground was cleared, and now Hyun-soo entered the village, having received his main task and completed his training. But before moving on, he had to return to real life, because there was plenty to do there. The main character had already gotten used to the game, but first he had to pay the hospital for the month and calculate his living expenses. Ji-hoon called, wondering if his friend had passed the training ground, because he didn't know, being too busy with work. Since Hyun-soo had arrived in the village, he now had access to the auction, where he had to go immediately. The equipment and items needed in the game were created and sold at auction for gold. 10 gold pieces are 10,000 won. Many people made a business out of this, so Chi-hong called his friend to Aries. And while he was playing, Ji-hoon didn't notice anything cooler than the swords Hyun-soo made with the blacksmith. With the VIP capsule and synchronization, everything became much cooler, and by filling up with the works of the greatest blacksmith, they would be able to earn money. While eating, Hyun-soo thought about his path, realizing that he needed to focus on his craft and tasks in order to earn gold, and for that, he would have to keep an eye on his stamina. But that was nothing compared to real blacksmithing, yet the game still took a lot of energy. The main character ran to improve his stamina. He hoped that his father would wait a little longer, and he would definitely help him wake up. Upon returning to the village, Hyun-soo gained access to the auction. The system asked him for the name of the shop where he wanted to place the item. The guy named his shop Hyun's Forge, and suddenly the system showed him a completely different environment. The sky appeared before Hyun-soo. He was standing in an empty space, and in front of him were huge weights, creating a shop. From now on, the main character could use the auction anytime, anywhere. Hyun-soo wondered what to list first. Apart from the Gwangmyeon, he only had one prototype that he had forged in the smithy. This sword was rare, and the average price for swords of a similar level was about 100 gold coins. Ji-hoon also advised him not to set the price too low. The main character decided to list the sword for 100 gold coins, hoping for good news. In the meantime, he could wait and find out more about the village. Players soon noticed the item Hyun-soo had put up for sale, surprised that it had been created by a player without a class. But what seemed strange was that the price of Hyun's first sword began to rise more and more. There was shock within the guild, and Blom, the deputy head, was shocked by the lot he saw. They said that the creator of the first-level sword had no class. Everyone was shocked because he had made the best sword from the simplest materials. In addition, they say that it can be improved, but the worse the material, the lower the chance of success. Hyun-soo used materials of the same rank, so he also saved money. And with such a small investment, it will last up to level 50. Hyun-soo even named his sword as his first creation. The price was increased because it was the first collectible item. Blame noted that with such skill at the first level, it was valuable in itself. They would gain prestige, because they were the first to recognize and buy Hyun-soo's work. The main character felt awkward when he put the item up for auction, because he hadn't forged anything in a long time and was just getting used to the game. But suddenly, a system screen appeared in front of Hyun-soo and informed him that his first sword had already been sold. Opening the adventurer's journal, where he could examine his equipment, the main character was surprised, as he did not expect such a quick sale. The lot was listed for only 100 gold coins, so Hyun-soo opened his book to find out how much it had been sold for. Overjoyed, he shouted that the sword had been sold for 1,000,000 won. It seemed crazy to him. The buyer was the Golden Shield Guild, and they contacted Hyun-soo. Blom wrote a message on his own behalf, saying that it was an honor for him to purchase Hyun's first artifact. The doors of the Golden Shield Guild were always open to talented individuals, and he was offered an exclusive contract for sales or membership in the guild. The Gold Shield Blacksmith Guild had 780,000 subscribers. Chi-hong said that gaining subscribers was much more difficult than leveling up. The more subscribers, the more people followed them, and attention leads straight to profit. In a relatively short time, Hyun's Forge gained 82 subscribers. When he opened the message window, dozens of papers appeared from the book. Offers to join the guild continued to pour in. Ares was waiting for blacksmiths who were disappearing from the real world. The value of a craftsman's skill shone brightest when backed up by accurate data and figures. But now Hyun-soo did not want to join the guild, as he had not yet shown the world even half of his skills. Arriving at the Lord's castle, the main character wanted to show his true worth. The young man addressed the Lord, saying that restoration was risky, and the item could be lost forever. Therefore, it was necessary to find the best restorer on the continent. Such a master could only be found in the capital, but he refused to meet with anyone, meaning it was impossible to lure him to Barden's lands. My lord could not leave his lands and go himself. This was the only relic left from his father. No one had ever seen a bow like this before, so he had no choice. The man before my lord was Bell, a master rogue. He disguised himself as a blacksmith, and thanks to his skill at making false promises, spent a week gaining Lord Vance's trust. Vance was going to pay 300 gold coins for the restoration of the relic, and Bell promised to take it to the capital and restore it to its best condition. But at that moment, Hyun-soo entered the throne room. The main character overheard the conversation and told the Lord that the bow could be restored right there. Bell became angry when he saw Hyun-soo, because this guy was ruining his plan with false promises to the Lord. The guards explained to Lord Vance that the guy in front of them was the one who came with a letter of recommendation from Instructor Relson. Vance thought for a moment, and soon remembered that Relson was a mentor from the training camp for novice hunters. As Lord Barden, my lord wanted to ask the main character about his skills and experience in the game world of Ares. The young man introduced himself, revealing that he was only a first-level character and did not yet have a class. Bell was shocked, considering it disrespectful to the Lord, since restoration was only available to blacksmiths above level 80. According to Bell, the recursive bow was an epic rarity, and he had spent a whole week on it. The main character corrected the guy, because this bow was not actually recursive. It was a hotgun bow. Hyun-soo heard from the guard Becker that his lord wanted to restore his late father's burnt bow. It was a gift once received from a mysterious stranger. It was a unique bow, the likes of which had never been seen here before. Vance asked the young man to be quiet. He was usually generous to strangers in his lands, but my lord was tired of the false tales about family heirlooms. From now on, the lord ordered the main character to speak only about what he could vouch for. Hyun-soo asked permission to clarify something about the bow. Perhaps it was a gift from a foreigner, but it was made in these parts. On the way to the hall, the hero noticed a painting with animals resembling water buffaloes. Their horns were considered a valuable material even in the real world, but the resemblance was most noticeable because of the similar curve of the horns of these creatures and the curves of the bow. Whale tendons were used instead of ox tendons, which is quite difficult to explain if the bow was made by foreigners. Vance explained that the foreigner was a friend of his father's. The painting Hyun-soo saw depicted giant water buffaloes, monsters from the Barden swamps. Their horns and whale tendons came from Barden Harbor. Both are very rare. He used them to make the Lord's bow, the best ever made in Barden. Hyun-soo noticed something that even a 100-level blacksmith couldn't see. He couldn't let his father's relic simply decay. Vance wanted to entrust it to someone, if only there was a way. Soon, Milord decided to trust Hyun-soo to restore his late father's heirloom. He accepted the task with a reward of 50 gold coins. Turning to Bell, Vance told him to leave, and that he would be contacted if he was needed. Bell left in anger, remembering the stranger's name and promising himself that he would make him pay for this sooner or later. When the fake blacksmith left the hall, my lord wanted to know what was needed to repair the bow. Hyun-soo needed water buffalo horns and whale tendons. He also needed oak, mulberry, bamboo, and finishing tools. After naming all the materials the bow was made of, the system gave Hyun-soo a way to repair Gakun. Gakun Archer. The requirement for restoration was level 60. The chance of failure during restoration was less than 70%, but failure would destroy the item. As a child, Hyun-soo helped his father make bows, bending wooden elements with joy. His father praised his son because his hands were calloused, but he still did not give up and continued to help. Hyun-soo simply enjoyed making blacksmith products with his father. His father promised that for his efforts, he would teach him how to work with steel when he grew up. In real life, the hero burst into tears. Thanks to the capsule, their fates crossed, and with his skills, Hyun-soo will be able to do everything as he was taught. Soon, the boy was presented with the materials he needed to work with to restore the relic. Lord Vance entered the room, deciding to help the main character with such a difficult task. First, the main character began to cut off the oak parts, making gentle movements with an axe. It was hard for the Lord to work all day, and his strength was already running out, but one thing kept him going. When Vance saw how happy Hyun-soo was doing what he loved, it gave him strength. The duo worked on the bow for a whole week. The Lord was so tired that he wanted to leave, but Hyun-soo needed help with the frame. The main character assumed that the reason the Lord came to help every day was because he wanted to restore the relic with his own hands. Getting up, Vance agreed with the boy. This bow was the only thing that preserved the memory of his father. Hyun-soo also enjoyed working with the bow, as he had many fond memories associated with it. Shaking hands, the main character added that thoughts of the past required time and effort. The passionate work on the bow lasted a very long time, and for weeks on end, the Lord and Hyun-soo tried to restore the relic. On the last day, the Gakun bow was finally restored. The epic relic returned to its original form. My lord led Hyun-soo to the statue of his father. He asked him if he could see the bow that the mysterious stranger had given him. The main character suggested that Hyun-soo try the bow in his hands. He wanted him to see if it felt the same as in his memories. My lord raised both hands, pulled the bowstring, and the arrow began to shine, and an aura emanated from the bow. The shot pierced the air, and the arrow flew beautifully, and in a clear trajectory, straight to the target. Turning away from the main character, Vance said that the bow felt completely different than before. There was happiness on Milord's face, because Hawkgun was now much better than he had been. Finally, the restoration task was complete. Hyun-soo achieved a result of over 100% and developed his relationship with Vance to the maximum. Vance thanked the young man, because now he would be able to fulfill his duty with a clear conscience. But the promised reward seemed too small for Hyun-soo's efforts, so in addition to 2,000 gold coins, the reward for the task was increased due to its phenomenal success. Vance granted him the right to use the forge free of charge. 2 million won was more than enough to cover all expenses until the next outing, so Hyun-soo was immensely happy. Taking the sword in his hands, Vance asked the main character if he had ever thought about learning fencing. Before becoming Lord of Barden, Vance was a swordsman, and he possessed the highest art of swordplay. It was a secret art of the Prime Kingdom, a technique that had subdued countless monsters attacking from all sides, and brought peace to Barden. The main character was undoubtedly a natural blacksmith, but Vance also saw in him the talent of a swordsman. In addition to what instructor Relson wrote in his recommendation after seeing Hyun-soo, he was convinced. Excellent physical condition and lightning-fast reflexes when working with tools. Incredibly deep knowledge and understanding of all types of weapons. On top of that, Vance wanted to share a part of his essence as a swordsman with him. The system issued a new task, fencing training. My lord tried to convince him, because they had little time. If Hyun-soo worked as hard as he did in his workshop, that would be more than enough. And so a busy month flew by. The main character created his own hotgun and restored the Mad Lord's rusty armor. Then Vance continued fencing training with Hyun-soo, and every day his skills improved. After a month of long training sessions, the main character finally managed to defeat the Lord in a duel, having completed his fencing training. After repairing his armor and making his own bow, Hyun-soo thanked the Lord for his training, after which he was about to leave. Now the main character had a new goal. He had to find a real profession. The Lord was always happy to see Hyun-soo again if he needed help. The guy finally said goodbye to him and gathered his things. The new equipment he had forged and restored during this time was the Mad Lord's armor, strong enough to compensate for his low damage reflection skill level, and a brand new Gakkun, which added 60% to his accuracy. To cover his living expenses during the upcoming quest, Hyun-soo made several rare bows and put them up for auction. Soon, the main character put Gakkun up for auction, calling it Hyun's second bow. He was curious to see how much it would go for this time. An unfamiliar guy watched this lot. He thought it was unbelievable. Even Black, the #1 player in Korea, didn't create such a bow at level 10. But Hyun, being at level 1 and using only low-quality materials, was still able to create such a bow. Smith, the best blacksmith in the world, said so himself. After all, Ares rules everything in this game. If Ares is moved by a player's actions, he will grant them a suitable profession, skill, or title. This stranger was the head of the Golden Shield Guild. He was surprised that the blacksmith Hyun was already capable of creating artifacts of such a level, just like Smith. The final auction price was 2,500 gold for Hyun-soo's Gakkun bow. Someone paid 2 million won in real money for a bow in the game. That's much more expensive than in reality. Hyun-soo already had over 3,000 subscribers. Invitations to guilds and orders for work came in so often that he couldn't keep up with them. Deciding to ignore them all, the main character rushed to the holy land of blacksmiths, the Blacksmith Tower. After a long time, Hyun-soo found himself on a green lawn, with a huge tower shining in front of him. To the guy's surprise, the Tower of Blacksmiths looked even more majestic when he was right in front of it. Making his way straight to the entrance, Hyun-soo was puzzled. He did not know how to enter, for there was a seal on the gate. To become a blacksmith, one had to break the seal with a sword forged in a magical forge. This seal resembled a stone, volcanic basalt, which had to be broken. The main character immediately set to work, entering the magical forge. Here he could practice the blacksmithing skills necessary for the test. Materials and tools are provided endlessly. Production time is also significantly reduced compared to a regular forge. However, the swords created here can only be used for the test. The test was to break a stone seal with a sword. The tower tested only the blacksmithing skills of the applicants. The man threw his hammer to the ground, calling everyone useless idiots. After all, each of them asked how much they would earn if they learned something or wanted to know how to earn money faster. Drinking dozens of alcoholic beverages, the man was angry that these people only thought about stamping out junk with their skills. No one cared about the true craft of blacksmithing. The owner of the blacksmith's tower, Dung, was sad because he believed that the blacksmith's path was already dead, since everyone came only for gold. If you just slap together a sword and swing it around without any soul, it's not hard to get exactly that, because that's Dung's role. No one would ever be able to cut through the sealing stone. At best, they could scratch it. At that time, the main character decided to forge a Damascus blade. Only master blacksmiths could forge Damascus steel. The system recommended starting with a simple iron dagger. But Hyun-soo did not want to, because with an unlimited amount of materials, he could try, because he knew how. His father said that even a sword could cut through stone. Hyun-soo inherited from him a forging method that had once been developed by his father. The perfect smelters and equipment created by magic, everything necessary for forging Damascus steel, and an unlimited supply of various ores, even reduced production time, provided motivation. This game delighted Hyun-soo more and more, allowing him to forge with all his heart. Dung was sleeping soundly, but suddenly he was awakened by a strange shaking. He began to look around, but didn't understand anything. The entire tower was shaking, and the tower keeper couldn't understand if someone had started forging a blade. When Dung went downstairs, he saw the light, and his expression changed dramatically at the sight of such a miracle. It was Hyun-soo. Thanks to his excellent skills, the guy managed to cut through the sealing stone. Looking at the main character, Dung could not hide his surprise and joy at this man, considering him a god of blacksmiths. Until now, they had measured abilities using the sealing stone, but Hyun-soo had completely destroyed it, so the power could not be measured. Dung led the guy to the magic circle. The guy did not understand the purpose of this place, because it was a summoning circle. The keeper of the tower explained almost nothing, only asking Hyun-soo to take his hammer. The weight of the hammer fell on the main character's chest and began to push him back. The system informed the guy that he had received an SS rank task. Soon, Hyun-soo was pulled into the magic circle. It was a real test that he had to pass, and Dung believed in the god of blacksmiths. The magic circle teleported the guy to a completely different place. He found himself on the wall of a castle. Hyun-soo grabbed his head, wondering where this trial had come from, assuming it was a recheck. There were dozens of enemies in front of the castle, and the high-ranking task was to defeat the invading army of orcs. The main character was confused, because this should have been a task for a blacksmith. The knights noticed Hyun-soo's arrival, thinking he was reinforcement from the master blacksmith. The condition for completion was the treasure that had been brought in. If he reached 70% among 50 valiant warriors, the task would be completed. Hans, the commander of the level 48 punitive detachment, thanked Hyun-soo for coming. The orcs attacked the kingdom of Prime more fiercely with each passing day. In battle, they damaged most of their equipment and asked Hyun-soo to repair it with his skills. The main character said that there had been some misunderstanding, as he had not yet received the blacksmith class, so he could not use his skills. But the knights doubted his words, as Hyun-soo still had Denga's hammer in his hands. Hyun-soo began to explain that he had received it during a class change test, and had been sent here for an additional task. The knights wanted to know if the guy had any combat experience. He revealed that he was a complete novice in battle. Hans thought that Dung would send reinforcements, but instead they were given a novice who they would have to look after. The situation was critical now, so Hyun-soo could wait it out in the watchtower. There was a safe place there where he could wait. While Hans was talking, one of the ferocious orcs threw his axe straight at the commander. Hyun-soo noticed it before the others did, and easily deflected the axe with a sword thrust. The main character still asked for permission to join the battle, even though he was still a novice. Hyun-soo decided to fight the orcs the same way he had fought the goblins in the trials. Hans asked the blacksmith to follow Ben's squad, where everything would be explained to him along the way. Ben took command, and immediately rushed into battle against the orcs who were already approaching them. The orc swung his axe. Ben raised his shield and collided with him, creating sparks on the battlefield. This pressure was not at all like what he had experienced with the goblins. Now Hyun-soo understood that he was in a real battle. The main character decided to test his skills in battle, as he did not think he would lose. Repeating the fate of the goblins, with just one swing of his sword, the orc's head fell from his shoulders. Hyun-soo easily defeated the level 10 orc, gaining 86 experience points. The guy rejoiced, because a month of training had not been in vain. Noticing Hyun-soo's level increase, Ben stared, realizing that he really didn't have a class. Because the boy was too distracted during the fight, the orc decided to take advantage of this moment to take his life. Hyun-soo switched his weapon to a Korean bow and was about to save Ben from certain death. Seconds before Ben was fatally wounded, an arrow struck the orc, knocking him back. Ben didn't have time to understand what was happening, and at that moment, another enemy approached him, swinging an axe. But Hyun-soo was quite agile, so he managed to save Ben once again. The guy couldn't believe that such a thing was even possible. The main character sent the huge orc flying with a single arrow. Hans told Ben to pull himself together, as the orcs began to attack Hyun-soo while he was trying to recover. The orcs understood the danger of the mysterious blacksmith, so they decided to surround him first. Ben began to run with all his might, and Hyun-soo got into trouble because he was saving him and lost his vigilance. Switching his weapon to daylight, the main character used his rage skill, which attacked all enemies indiscriminately within a 10-meter radius. The sharpness of the sword managed to cut the orc into pieces, increasing Hyun-soo's levels many times over. For killing all these orcs, the main character's contribution to the mission rose by 19%. Hans realized that the old master Dung had sent Hyun-soo for a reason, because now they would be able to win. The commander summoned all the knights, declaring that together with Hyun-soo, they would be able to crush the orc army. His actions raised the morale of the punitive detachment. The guy thought that he had indeed become part of the detachment. With each attack, another orc died, raising Hyun-soo's level and increasing his contribution to the mission. His contribution grew quite quickly, and when the orcs were almost subdued, the guy received a secret assignment. A new, unprecedented episode began. A new enemy appeared, a level 51 orc warrior. Hans ordered the knights to stand still. He had spotted him. It was the very enemy they could not defeat. The orc warrior brought with him another group of orcs, who came in from all sides, surrounding the punitive detachment. Hans realized that it was his mistake, for they had become so engrossed in the battle that they had gone too far. But the knights were not going to give up. They were ready, believing that this would be the day when they would finally kill all the orcs. The knights became more confident in themselves, and after so many days of suffering, They decided not to retreat. Hyun-soo was providing support with his bow at this time, not expecting the knights to lose their heads and rush into battle. After shooting at an orc warrior, nothing happened. The Korean bow was not strong enough to pierce such an enemy. The Korean bow had properties that increased its penetrating power and accuracy, but the orc warrior's skin was as tough as armor. It was impossible to defeat him with a bow alone. Hans knew they couldn't win, but he didn't want to retreat anymore. Attacking the orc leader without thinking, Captain Hans did not inflict any damage, but lost his arm in return. Hyun-soo saw it all with his own eyes, and he couldn't just stand by and do nothing while people were dying in front of him. The squad was defeated, the knights' equipment was on the verge of failure, and many of them were exhausted. The orc warrior was unshakable. No matter how hard the punitive squad tried, they couldn't break through his armor. Hyun-soo shouted loudly to get the knights' attention, telling them that if this continued, they would be destroyed. According to the main character's tactics, the knights had to regroup and retreat into a defensive position. The first thing to do was to retreat into the forest behind him, and Hyun-soo was going to catch up with them later. Ben asked the knights to listen to Hyun-soo's orders, because they still needed to carry the captain to safety and regroup. The knights began to retreat into the forest and maintain a defensive formation, while the main character kept up the attack from a distance. Ben said that they would slow down in the forest, and at best, it would only give them a short respite. Hyun-soo asked the knights to hold out for just 5 minutes, to which Ben agreed, no matter what. Thinking that his arrows could not pierce the sturdy armor, the main character rushed into the bamboo forest. Taking the epic hammer Denga, which could copy consumable items and reduce recharge time, into his hands, he came up with a plan. The squad of knights continued to fall, but they understood that they had to hold out for 5 minutes, so they got back up again. Through pain and suffering, Ben gritted his teeth and kept moving forward, because the punitive squad would never retreat. The orc warrior was about to strike and take Ben's life with a single swing of his axe. The orc's blow hit the ground. Someone had stopped the warrior, and the life of the knight Ben was saved once again. Suddenly, the orc warrior's hand began to bleed, leaving the knight even more shocked. It was Hyun-soo, who had returned to the battlefield, having made himself new arrows against the strong enemy. The orc warrior began to scream. He had never felt such sharp pain before and wanted to kill Hyun-soo first. But the main character was expecting this attack, and with new arrows on his bow, he waited. The tong arrow was made of split bamboo. Its special ability was its penetrating power. Egasol arrows, carved and then recreated with Denga's hammer, were placed inside tong. Combined with Gakun, the set bonus added 25% attack power and 10% piercing power. The orc warrior was unable to reach the main character, as knights stood in his way, holding him back with their shields. The knights' new goal was to protect and delay the enemy so that Hyun-soo could attack. Pyeongjun's penetration power was comparable to that of a matchlock rifle. With one precise shot, Hyun-soo defeated the orc warrior. The master received the title of Orc Slayer. His attack power against orcs increased by another 15%, and they began to fear Hyun-soo. The orc warriors began to scatter in terror, and the main character rushed to catch them. The last thing the orcs saw before the end of their lives was the terrifying sight of Hyun-soo and his shining arrow. At dawn, the SS rank quest was completed, and the invading orc army was defeated by Hyun-soo. The final contribution was 92%, and the system congratulated the hero, who had completed the mission with phenomenal results. The punitive detachment was delighted with Hyun-soo's success. They began to trust the young man's leadership. He received a hidden item that increased his charisma by 10 points. Captain Hans had been able to only defend himself for a very long time, and he had not hoped to live to see this day, but they had achieved the coveted victory over the orcs. On behalf of the entire punitive squad, the captain thanked the main character for his help. Hyun-soo also thanked the knights for this trial, rejoicing in another battle completed. Dung declared that the Tower of Blacksmiths had fallen into disrepair. All the honor and glory went to the knights. Only those blinded by the thirst for gold came to the Tower of Blacksmiths. Dung needed someone who possessed the true soul of a blacksmith, and that would be the person worthy of taking this sword. Many candidates came to the tower, but the prophecy never came true. The prophecy left by the blacksmith god in the distant past. The prophecy that a successor would appear and restore former prosperity. The man noticed that among the tower's craftsmen, only one was worthy of undergoing the sword's trial. He considered the chosen one to be a mere deception, for which the masters had taken time off from their work and gathered here. Coulson, the master of the bow tower, asked why they had given the right to be tested to some young foreigner. Dung asked Coulson if he had read the letter. It was a well-deserved right given to those who passed the test. Moreover, Hyun-soo had not even changed classes. But he led the soldiers and, demonstrating his blacksmithing skills, destroyed the orc warriors. This trial is based on a prophecy. The successor to the blacksmith god will be stronger than all others. Therefore, this sword will give the final answer. The answer was not long in coming, as the assistant reported that Hyun-soo had already arrived in the hall. When the young man entered, Dung noticed that he had passed the test and earned the right to enter the blacksmith's sanctuary. Moreover, he had earned the right to challenge the sword of prophecy left by the blacksmith god. The moment Hyun-soo touched it, everything would be decided. After that, he would receive a worthy reward. The main character did not understand what was going on, because he had completed an additional S-rank task during the class change test. Coulson congratulated Hyun-soo, saying it was an impressive performance to show such quick thinking at a critical moment. However, according to the master of the bow tower, the arrow he created was only a semblance of a Solarian. And if it weren't for that epic bow, Hyun-soo would not have passed the test, so Coulson considered it luck. Coulson asked Hyun-soo to begin the ritual by pulling out the sacred ball of the god of blacksmiths. The master craftsmen of the smith's tower stood before the main character, each of them a living legend of Ares. They are elite named NPCs. Each of them had titles and levels that inspired awe. Coulson, the master of the bow tower, was level 365. The main character was impressed, but he did not think that his skills were inferior to those of the masters of the tower. If they competed relying only on their own strength, without any titles, he would be able to do it. As soon as Hyun-soo approached the divine sword, it began to disappear abruptly, surprising the young man. The aura from the sword began to absorb into the main character, who was trying to understand where the sword had disappeared to. Dung thought that Hyun-soo would be worthy, saying that this was what the fulfillment of the prophecy meant. Until now, they had only followed rituals and procedures. Coulson believed that if he were the true successor, he would not even have to touch the sword. He flatly refused to accept this. The system congratulated Hyun-soo, the first in Ares to receive the god class. It was shocking, because he was still a novice. Now the main character had risen to the 10th level and received the Godsmith class, the first in the history of Ares. When creating artifacts, Hyun-soo would not be limited by the level of materials. Also, when creating artifacts, his skill increased depending on their type. As a blacksmith, he will become stronger than anyone else. The first class quest, the sword test, will only begin at level 100. All the masters accepted the new god blacksmith, but Coulson began to shout that he would not accept it. As tower masters, they were waiting for a great successor who would receive the revelation of the blacksmith god. It could not be said that the choice of the sword was the will of the blacksmith god himself. Coulson kept insisting that the successor must be recognized by all the tower masters, because that was also part of the prophecy. Coulson, the master of the bow tower, challenged the main character, the stranger, to a blacksmith's duel. If Hong Seo wins this duel, only then will the master of the bow tower recognize him as his successor. But if Coulson wins, Hyun-soo will have to give up the title bestowed upon him by the sword of prophecy. Dung thought Coulson had gone mad and asked him to be captured, but the other masters of the tower stood motionless. Coulson suggested that the main character flee, in which case he would be made deputy master of the tower. The main character decided to accept this challenge, for the blacksmiths spoke through their craftsmanship. The rules of the duel were simple. They had to fight with swords they had forged themselves. Whose sword broke first would lose. The best forge had already been prepared in the hall. Now that Hyun-soo had the skills of a blacksmith, one day should be enough for forging. Dung said that Hyun-soo had agreed to the duel too quickly, as Coulson was one of the most skilled masters of the towers. Even with the power of a god, he still needed time to gain experience in battle. The main character agreed with Dung. If he had remained in his previous profession, this battle would have been impossible for him. Within the game world of Ares, incredible skills and enhancements depended on level and title. In addition, each tower master has their own unique abilities. Now the only real difference was pure skill, thanks to the skill Hyun-soo had acquired. He could create any artifact he wanted and give it any effect. The higher the rank of the effect, the more difficult the task. The effectiveness depended on the skill of creation and varied from 0 to 100%. Coulson was a gunsmith who forged swords. The art of sword forging had been passed down from generation to generation. He was its rightful heir, having inherited the craft from his father. But then someone appeared who was much more skilled than him, and so, instead of a weaponsmith, Coulson had to become a master of the bow tower. It was bitter for him, but Coulson had to accept it and serve the great Dung, which he himself did not want. But this time, Dung brought in some stranger, a nobody, and put him above Coulson. The The process of endowing artifacts with abilities and effects follows the basic law of equivalent exchange. To gain an advantage in this duel, Hyun-soo had to focus on durability and maximize the destructive power of his weapon. This meant that in order to obtain the desired ability, Dung would have to forge an item of the highest rank. This was because Hyun-soo's strength and properties were only of a rare rank, which was too low for a duel. Soon, the main character created his ideal blade. He wondered what the blacksmith god's plans and abilities were. The next day, Coulson and Hyun-soo stood facing each other, holding their new blades in their sheaths. Coulson wanted to see if the main character's skills were worthy of the role of heir to the gods. First, the man decided to present his blade, Coulson's Dark Knight. All of his special skills were invested in its strength and destructiveness. The tower's masters expected such skill from Coulson, but it was truly impressive. To forge such a blade in one night was a great achievement. Coulson expected nothing from the main character, for he had put all the secret techniques of his family into his sword. When he took out his blade, it was only of a rare rank and had significantly less durability than Dark Knight. Coulson was delighted by this sight, a broad smile spreading across his face. He believed that Dung had made a huge mistake. Coulson even regretted wasting his precious time on a boy with a toy in his hands. He was too confident and immediately rushed into battle, hoping for an easy victory. Soon, the two masters clashed, leaving only seconds before the winner would be determined. Coulson's sword was destroyed. He lost the duel and couldn't believe what had happened. The main character stated that the blade was not only determined by rank. This sword's special skill had a 65% chance of destroying the opponent's weapon. Coulson remembered his childhood. His father kept telling him about someone who would destroy the old world order and lead the people, bringing a new doctrine. It would be the blacksmith god, and it would be an honor for his father if Coulson managed to meet this person. Dung was delighted when Hyun-soo told him that simply breaking a sword was not enough to convince the tower masters. So he decided to create a blade that could cut swords. Dung did not know that such a thing was even possible. Creating an artifact of the required level always came down to the skill of the blacksmith. The higher the level of the effect, the more difficult the creation. Dung was proud of the blacksmith god. Hyun-soo had all the knowledge and skill to bring such an idea to life. Coulson turned to the main character and asked him if he could forge a sword like that. Hyun-soo said that words like impossible did not exist. These words made Coulson realize something. With tears in his eyes, the master of the bow tower bowed before Hyun-soo, calling him the god of blacksmiths. Coulson presented Hyun-soo with a gift, a small chest containing 500 gold coins. The second gift was a scroll with a drawing of the legendary bow, which had been passed down in the Tower of Blacksmiths. Coulson was never able to create this bow, and to pass it on to someone who could become great was its true purpose. Dung said that now that the god of blacksmiths had finally appeared, they too could start with a clean slate. The master of the blacksmith's tower asked the main character to ascend to the pinnacle of power and explore this vast world. Chi-hong went out with Hyun-soo for a walk late at night. They drank together, and the guy was happy that his friend had changed classes to divine. Chi-hong advised his friend Ares because his talent was going to waste, but the main thing was that after all his suffering in the forge, he had finally made it. Happy for his friend, Chi-hong wanted to know the differences between the divine class, but Hyun-soo didn't see any major differences. More important to the main character was that tomorrow he had to pay his father's hospital bills. Meanwhile, another 10 million won had been added for treatment. Chi-hong found out about the new medicine for his father that Hyun-soo had asked about, but it wasn't covered by insurance, so he needed to prepare at least 20 million won. In addition to his father, Hyun-soo also had to treat his own injuries from the accident. Money alone was not enough. There was a limit to how many artifacts Hyun-soo could forge and sell. In short, he needed to level up and earn fame by beginning his ascent to godhood. According to Chi-hoon, Hyun-soo had to establish connections with the most famous person in Ares. That way, he would be able to receive much better rewards and rare items even for quests of the same level. And then, on that basis, he could create even higher quality artifacts. But before Hyun-soo could say anything, his friend revealed that he already had an idea. Hyun-soo just had to wait a little while Chi-hoon got the best achievements and helped him. People were talking online about Ares, a lord who was always in 21st place and finally got a legendary class. But that wasn't all. The most surprising thing was that he defeated the Sword King Barad. No one had ever been able to hit him before, but he was defeated. The Lord's power was incomprehensible to other players, because he won an event comparable to a miracle. Hyun-soo had to pay his overdue bills and contribute 30 million won a month. It was impossible, even if he added up the quest reward and the proceeds from the auction. But Hyun-soo couldn't let his father's treatment stop. Glancing at his phone, the main character noticed that Hyun's first sword had been sold to the Lord for 53,000 gold. Hyun-soo immediately ran to the assistant, saying that he wanted to pay all the hospital bills. The game helped him cover the largest bills, and the guy promised himself never to quit the game Aries. The Lord thanked the main character for selling him the sword. Thanks to this blade, the Lord was able to fulfill his dream and pass the Bharata trial. If people understood the true value of the sword that had been created, they would realize that the 50 million won paid by the Lord was a mere trifle. Even the king was clearly surprised that the blade could cut through the sword of the king himself and pierce his defense. The Lord added that the king of the kingdom of Goyard, the sword king Barad, was waiting for Hyun-soo and wanted him to forge a sword for him. The main character had to meet with Barad to pay his father's hospital bills and get back the lost forge. The man got out of the car and, glancing at the ruined building, noticed that there was only a month left until the end of his agreement with Hyun-soo. Later, on the phone, Hyun-soo learned that he would not be able to meet with Barad because the divine class did not open all doors for him. To meet with a high-level NPC, his level and fame had to be equally high. To meet with Barad, he needed at least level 200. But that didn't mean there was no way. The Goyard Martial Arts Tournament was an event held every year in the kingdom. Contestants were limited to levels 50-60. Barad, the King of Swords, was looking for talents with growth potential, so every year he held a fencing tournament for foreigners. This tournament was about to begin, and the winner would receive a reward personally from Barad, so Chi Hong recommended that he participate. Thinking about such an excellent opportunity, Hyun-soo decided to first go to the lands of Kalis. According to Dung, these were the lands on the border of the northern kingdom of Dram, where hellish undead raged every day. There, his abilities would be needed more than anywhere else. The lands of Kalisa were a combat zone where monster invasions were repelled. This area was considered the best place to quickly level up. When Hyun-soo entered the new territory, he was greeted by Centurion Render, level 76. The undead continued to grow in number, and Hyun-soo wanted to find out if the reason for this was known. When the sacred bell of Ramas rang in the lands of Kalas, the advancing undead weakened and became easier to deal with. Until recently, the ringing of the Ramas bell had scared away even distant undead. Hyun-soo wanted to know more. The reason for the stronger raids on the lands was a recent incident in which the bell was shattered into pieces. They were caught off guard, and the knights barely had time to strengthen their defenses. The enemy sensed this and began to slowly creep closer. Hyun-soo asked if the bell could be repaired. The centurion finally realized who was standing before him, the boy sent by Dung. The centurion immediately began to lead him to the captain. The knight of the Carcel, Captain Carl, asked if it was true that Hyun-soo had been sent by the great Dung. Everything was exactly as he said. The main character wanted to personally inspect the Ramas bell, but Dung had already declared the bell beyond repair. Captain Carl had already secretly tried to restore it several times. All the craftsmen said the same thing. The cracked Ramas bell was an irreparable artifact. There is one person in Castle who is still looking for a way to repair it, but to no avail. This man is at level 209, and even he was unable to do it, so Carl doubted Hyun-soo's abilities. After asking for information, the main character decided to reveal that he was at level 13. The captain did not want to reproach the one who came to his aid, but with Hyun-soo's level, it would be better to find a place where he would really be useful. The lands of Kales are now on the brink of destruction, and when the main forces of the undead army launch their attack, it will be the end. Captain Carl's duty is to protect his lord and the people to the very end, and he must fulfill it. Suddenly, one of the knights interrupted the captain, saying that the undead had attacked the eastern wall. A huge flock of ghouls was rushing towards the castle. These creatures were level 41. The captain sounded the alarm and began to rush to the eastern wall to hold the gate, calling Centurion to follow him. Before leaving, Captain Carl stated that everything they had discussed must remain a secret. If everything went as it had in the war with the orcs, Hyun-soo would be able to handle it. The system assigned him a task for the battle for territory. The archers took their positions and began shooting at the hundreds of ghouls climbing the walls. The main character decided to help the knights with his bow, but Centurion told him that undead creatures were difficult to kill without weapons charged with holy power, so he had to hit the same spot over and over again. But a single shot was enough for Hyun-soo's arrow to strike down a ghoul, even without holy power. The Centurion was speechless, and just watched as the main character drew his bow again. With one direct shot, Hyun-soo was able to pierce a dozen ghouls at once, killing them all. The knight was thrilled when he saw how effective a combat unit Hyun-soo was. Things weren't as bad as Hyun-soo had thought. At this rate, they would be able to repel the wave of ghouls. The system started a new story, and now the main character had to defeat a giant ghoul. The giant was a dangerous enemy, and the captain had to be called in. The monster was level 89. But Captain Carl couldn't join the battle with the giant right now because he was guarding the gate. If the huge ghoul started attacking, the wall could fall, but Hyun-soo suggested distracting the monster. The Centurion didn't know how to distract the enemy, and suddenly the main character jumped down from the wall. The knights were stunned by Hyun-soo's confidence, because going there alone was too dangerous. When the main character landed, the wave of ghouls noticed the enemy and rushed towards him. With a single swing of his blade, Daylight managed to defeat the entire wave, cutting the ghouls to pieces. Having dealt with the group of minor enemies, Hyun-soo found himself face to face with a giant ghoul. Behind the giant was another wave of enemies, which the guy immediately decided to kill. The stupid monster began to reach for Hyun-soo, and he decided to pull the enemy away from the wall. The hero definitely managed to attract the ghoul's attention, as it tried with all its might to attack him. Hyun-soo continued to run away from the wall while the monster stamped its feet on the ground, hoping to crush him. Due to the ghoul's high speed, the main character decided to switch his weapon to a hornbow. Turning around, he immediately fired, hitting the giant ghoul with a swift arrow. Thinking he had won, Hyun-soo's hopes quickly fell, as the ghoul stood motionless even after the clear shot. The ghoul continued to attack while the main character was distracted, not understanding why the enemy had not taken any damage. With just one blow from the giant ghoul, Hyun-soo's health dropped below 10%, and when it reached 0, he would be forcibly kicked out of the game. The main character began to get up, thinking that being forced out of the game was nonsense. If Hyun-soo didn't pass this episode, he wouldn't be able to participate in the Goyard martial arts tournament. And if that happened, he could forget about his father's hospital bills and his own treatment. If the hero lost, he would no longer be able to return to his path in life. Aries is Hyun-soo's only chance to change reality, so he couldn't give up for anything in the world. The hero continued to shoot arrows, attacking the giant ghoul again, but this time he managed to wound the enemy. Now there was a hole in the enemy's leg. Feeling the pain, the giant began to scream in anger. Hyun-soo's health dropped below 3%, and the ghoul was about to strike. The main character fired again from his hand, putting more power into his shots. But this shot was his last, as the bowstring of the hornbow reached its limit and snapped. The bow was now useless, and the giant ghoul reached out its claws to strike the hero. Hyun-soo was unable to dodge and was pinned to the ground by the huge hand, bringing his life down to 1. Finding himself in darkness, the main character thought it was the end, but he did not want to accept it. The main character refused to give up, stretching his arm forward. The system reported that a special condition had been met. With health below 5%, his will and thirst for life met the requirements of the Blacksmith god, unlocking a new skill. The god's emergency creation was available for use. Hyun-soo had to forge a weapon in 20 seconds. Weapons created with this skill can only be used for 30 seconds. The countdown began, and a hammer appeared in the hero's hand. This was his last chance for victory. As he struck the metal, the god's creation allowed the main character to choose his materials. With only 8 seconds left, Hyun-soo carefully tried to make the perfect blade. When the time was up, he threw the sword over his head and prepared to defeat the giant ghoul. In a split second, he was behind the ghoul, striking it with the sword of the deadly oath. That swing of the sword was enough to defeat the giant ghoul, but Hyun-soo's strength was also exhausted. The system reported that he had killed a giant siege ghoul, raising his level to 38. This level was enough for him, but as he looked at the system, Hyun-soo began to lose consciousness. Falling to the ground, the nearest knight noticed this, and immediately rushed to the hero's aid. The punitive squad rescued the main character, and he soon regained consciousness, asking how much time had passed. To Hyun-soo's surprise, the knights began to rejoice, proclaiming him the hero of Kales. Captain Carl thanked the young man, because thanks to him they were still alive, asking how it happened. Any explanation would sound unconvincing, so Hyun-soo said he couldn't explain it. Before forging the deadly blade, the main character remembered that ghouls are similar to ghosts. They are vulnerable to holy power. As soon as he realized this, he immediately remembered the Sword of 4 Symbols. It is known for expelling evil spirits and warding off misfortune. Thanks to his father once telling him about its restoration, Hyun-soo was able to recreate this sword. Hyun-soo was glad that everything worked out as he had thought it would. Captain Carl reached into his pocket to reward the hero. For saving the entire punitive detachment, the captain gave him a bag containing 2,000 gold coins. Carl bowed before him, admitting that he had been wrong to think of Hyun-soo as just another stranger. Shaking the captain's hand, the hero thanked him for believing in him, having achieved maximum connection with the sword. The captain had only one request left. Carl wanted Hyun-soo to repair the Rama bell. The sword that the hero held in his hands. He could clearly feel the holy power within it. With such abilities, the captain believed that Hyun-soo could do it. Hyun-soo needed to go to the kingdom of Goyard, but Karl revealed that the lord had a legendary mineral. He could give it as a reward for repairing the bell. The fragments of the bell were on a pedestal, and Hyun-soo did not expect it to be so badly damaged. Karl hoped that he would still be able to restore it, even though the bell was too badly damaged. Thinking that there was a way to repair it, a certain lady entered the office and addressed the captain. The girl stated that even at level 290, she couldn't repair this artifact, so Hyun-soo wouldn't even be able to do anything. Bell told the leader of the Golden Shield Guild that she was leaving the guild, which greatly upset the man. She was angry that the leader had offered 500 million a year to some random player. The leader said that the blacksmith Jason sold his first sword for 500 million won. If they got him, the guild would skyrocket. Bell reminded him that the blacksmith they hired was just trying to make some extra money. The next one took the deposit and ran away. Then another one won the lottery and vanished. And before that, there were many similar blacksmiths. Bell noted that it was very difficult for her to clean up this mess, so the leader shouldn't have stopped her. Bell had no intention of joining another guild anytime soon, but she wanted to take a break. Before the girl left, the leader reminded her that he would always have a place for Bell if she decided to return. The girl arrived at Castle and noticed that this village was on the brink of collapse. She didn't want it to just disappear. This place showed Bell that it was not just NPCs who lived here, but real people, just like her. If they repaired Rama's bell, then perhaps the kingdom could stop everything. Bell thought the main character was just a simple swindler. He stepped back in confusion. Captain Karl asked the guys not to argue. He introduced the girl as Bell, the advanced blacksmith he had been talking about. Bell didn't believe him, because on top of everything else, he said he had repaired the bell. He himself was at level 38 and had somehow helped kill the dead. The girl didn't understand what trick he had pulled, but she was sure that the bell couldn't be repaired. Hyun-soo ignored the girl and began to examine the remains of Rama's bell. The bell was filled with holy power. It was completely destroyed and beyond repair. Taking the hammer in his hand, Hyun-soo swung it and struck a piece of the bell, completely breaking it. Bell couldn't believe her eyes. She opened her mouth and told the guy to stop immediately. The girl grabbed his hand, but Hyun-soo said that it was possible to repair the bell. Bell asked the main character if he knew what an irreparable artifact meant. Just then, a new wave of undead began their attack on the castle, this time breaking through much more forcefully. The system informed Bell that the territory of Castle had begun to renew itself, turning into the land of the undead. The girl thought it was the end, but Hyun-soo thought the opposite. If they repaired the bell, they could stop it. Having lost all hope, the girl despaired, but the main character reminded her that she wanted to protect the territory of Castle. The guy added the bell fragments to his inventory and asked Bell to follow him. Captain Karl was counting on Hyun-soo's abilities, and in the meantime, he was going to hold off the undead. Commanding the squad, Karl rushed into the attack. They had to hold out as long as possible. When he broke the fragment, the holy power did not disappear. This meant that the holy power was contained within the material itself. Hyun-soo wanted to melt it down and forge a new bell. If it was a solid bell, the holy power would become even more powerful. Bell had never seen such skills before, but the main character convinced her that you don't need to have a skill to fix something. The hero decided to do it all by hand, slowly remelting the material at a dangerous hour. Hyun-soo turned to Bell and asked her why she wasn't helping, because he couldn't do it alone. The game administrators watched the counter that reported the loss of castle territory. The man asked Beeler why he was complaining on the day of the update, but he just asked him to look at the screen. They believed that the update would be wasted because of the main character's restless fervor. The man smiled and said that couldn't be. The player wouldn't be able to fix the bell. The situation on the battlefield was heating up, with the undead continuing to take territory from the knights as they advanced. Some people lost hope and suffered defeat at the hands of the ghouls, whose temper did not weaken. Captain Karl tried his best to save his men, cutting off the heads of the ghouls. They had to hold out a little longer. The castle was the place where they were born and had lived their entire lives. Karl's will held firm, but his sword began to crack, signaling the approach of defeat. Having broken his sword, the captain did not know what to do, as the ghouls continued to attack. But a loud ringing stopped the enemy. Karl survived and listened in surprise to the familiar sound. The bell began to ring again, and the undead began to burn with hellish pain and the continuing ringing of the bell. Hope returned to Captain Karl, his faith justified, for Hyun-soo had repaired the Rama bell. The assistant, who had just doubted the player's success, spat out his coffee at the sight of success. The main character had indeed succeeded. Hanging the bell in its place, he struck it, scaring away the undead. Beller clutched his head. Realizing that Hyun-soo had not slept from the beginning of the countdown to the update, he immediately went to the smithy on the territory of Castle. He gathered all the city workers and began to repair Rama's bell. While the main character was drawing up plans, the townspeople listened to instructions from Bell, who was supervising the workers and supplying the battlefield. Then he used his skill to maximize its effectiveness against the undead and the forces of evil by adding a property that dealt direct damage. With a united will to protect the territory of Castle, if everyone worked as one, Rama's bell was filled with even more holy power, ensuring victory for the townspeople. After a couple more days, all the citizens were exhausted, but Hyun-soo continued to work diligently on the artifact. On the last day, Belle was so tired that she kept dozing off. But when she opened her eyes, Belle noticed that the bell was already completely ready to be hung. The title of apprentice shone brightly, and Hyun-soo had been working on the bell for several days without sleep. Belle witnessed the work of the master blacksmith, increasing her advanced blacksmithing skill level by 22%. The hero joked about how Belle slept despite the loud blows to the bell, but she wanted to ask something. Belle asked the guy if he was the very blacksmith Hyun that everyone was talking about. The bell looked magnificent. The artifact was called Hyun's second bell, and its rarity was unique. The artifact, which could not be repaired, was recreated, and after that, it became even stronger. Belle had never seen anything like it before, so she asked Hyun-soo to stay with her from that day on. On day X, the main character struck the bell, and the undead began to die rapidly from its effect. After killing all the undead, Hyun-soo was able to cancel the update and create a new history for the Kingdom of Kales. But such work came at a price, and after sleepless nights, Hyun-soo was exhausted. After completing the task, the main character fell unconscious. The rewards were changed, and Belle was by his side. Upon learning of the update change, the participants of the game Ares began to talk more and more about the famous blacksmith Hyun. The main character woke up to the sound of the system not being able to keep up with the new subscribers, who had already exceeded 100,000. Hyun-soo immediately came to his senses when he saw the number of his followers. Now, everyone who visits the territory of Castle will be able to see the unique bell. Captain Carl entered the room, delighted that the savior of the territory had awakened. He had come at the behest of the Lord to present an award for the creation of the bell. The main character was presented with 330,000 gold coins. With that kind of money, Hyun-soo could contact the most popular player. He also received a chest containing a personal gift from the Lord of the Kingdom of Castle. Hyun-soo was given the legendary mineral orichalcum for his persistent efforts in saving the city. Captain Carl thanked the young man from the bottom of his heart for not abandoning the kingdom. The despair of the people in Ares was no different from the despair in the real world. Hyun-soo apologized because he needed to return briefly to where he came from. He was going to get his forge back, so he immediately logged out of the system in joy. The next day in Gyeongju, Hyun-soo transferred 330 million won, regaining his smithy. Real estate investor Kang Hyuk-soo couldn't believe his eyes. He thought it was amazing. A year ago, Kang Hyuk-soo showed Hyun-soo the papers, and he had to pay 330 million won. There had been a serious fire in the smithy, which led to the incident. Hyuk-soo handed the main character a piece of paper with money that should have been enough to pay the bills. Before the investor left, Hyun-soo asked him if he could buy the smithy from him. If he could somehow raise the money, the main character wanted to buy the smithy back. Hyuk-soo did not understand his motives, because buying back a burned-down smithy was like throwing money down the drain. He didn't want to buy a new smithy, because this one belonged to him. Beginning to cry, the main character said that this place held memories of his father. The investor gave the young man exactly 1 year, but as soon as the year was up, he would sell it to the first buyer. A year was only an approximate time frame, because such real estate could be sold at any moment. Hyun-soo asked the man why he had kept his promise and been so kind to him. Putting his hand on his shoulder, the investor said that Hyun-soo was the first person to ask for a buyback after the sale, and he just wanted to support such a person. Thanking the investor again, the young man asked if Hyun-soo knew a game called Ares. He admitted that he was a blacksmith in this game, and could forge any artifact, regardless of level and rarity. Hyun-soo saw Belle for the first time after the undead incident, and they ended up in a bar. The girl revealed that she used to be the chief strategist of the Golden Shield Guild, the one who made the Golden Shield what it is today. And on that day, she was sure of one thing: Hyun-soo would one day become one of the best players. The girl decided to get straight to the point, telling the guy that when he created a guild, she wanted to be its first member. The main character reminded her that Belle had called him a fraud. She just said that anyone would have made a mistake in that situation. But Hyun-soo just teased her, and in the end, they shook hands and he agreed to work with her. Belle was shocked, because before that, the main character had to meet with Barad, the King of Swords, one of the 10 legends. Hyun-soo was going to participate in the Goyard tournament, because he had heard that Barad himself would present the prize to the winner. Belle thought this was nonsense, as rising stars from all over the world were coming to this tournament. Hyun-soo asked the girl not to worry, because he was going to strive for the top, using his strengths. Soon, the day of the Goyard tournament arrived. The man flew over the arena on a dragon, greeting strangers. Bakel announced that the tournament would begin as soon as he left the stage, and that soon they would all face monsters. The participants might not be able to see him, but His Highness was watching over them. Wishing the participants good luck, the Goyard tournament was declared open, causing everyone to cheer. The first monster was a golem. The system informed the participants that they had to survive the onslaught for 1 hour. The participants knew that the first opponent would be a golem, so they ran into battle with smiles on their faces. The stone golem was level 109, and whoever managed to defeat it would receive a reward in the first trial. Some were frightened when they saw the enemy's high level, but others believed that the first round should be easy. But everything turned out differently as soon as the golem struck one of the participants, who was instantly disconnected from the system. The next participant was also killed by the golem and forcibly disconnected from the system. Bakel returned to the castle, running through the corridors, realizing that this tournament was a complete failure. The stone golem from the high-level tournament had ended up here by mistake. If things continued like this, all the outsiders would be killed. Bakel asked His Highness to stop the tournament immediately, but the Sword King rejected this request. With a smile, the Sword King declared that Bakel had not yet understood that he needed to look at Hyun-soo. While the golem was rampaging, it was abruptly stopped by an arrow, shifting its attention to the main character. In Hyun-soo's hands was his third creation, an orichalcum short arrow that could return to the user. The legendary orichalcum ore was ideal for this arrow, living up to its characteristics. The destructive power of the arrow made from the legendary stone dealt devastating damage to the golem. The arrow's effect affected the monster, and the system reported that it was stunned for 4 seconds. Noticing the enemy's inaction, the participants immediately decided to take advantage of this moment and attack it together. When the golem came to its senses, it kicked the ground and crushed everything beneath it, throwing the people aside. In the monster's eyes, Hyun-soo stood out the most, as he was the most dangerous participant. One of the participants told the main character to run, because if they held out a little longer, it would all be over. But he didn't move an inch as the golem's fist came closer and closer to him. When the smoke cleared, no one understood what was happening. At that moment, Hyun-soo changed his weapon. The Sword of Daylight managed to stop the golem's blow, holding it back with its blade. But despite the sword's unique quality and power, the golem's blows were devastating. The monster's next blow broke the Sword of Daylight and threw Hyun-soo into the air. Bakel insisted that the tournament should be stopped, because even the main character was already at his limit. The king was about to listen to him, but suddenly the observation sphere began to shine brightly. Hyun-soo once again used the god's emergency creation ability. He created a Damascus blade. This sword was capable of destroying stone, and using it correctly, Hyun-soo pierced his enemy. The blow proved fatal to the golem, and the Damascus blade successfully defeated the stone golem. For defeating this monster, the main character rose 14 levels at once. One of the participants was surprised that the golem had been defeated. He noted that the test itself consisted of 3 stages, but the balance had already been disrupted. For some reason, Hyun-soo suddenly felt very ill and lost consciousness on the battlefield. The participants thought Hyun was a jack of all trades, but he seemed to be a master of weapons. Bakel returned to the arena at that moment. Waving his hand, he said that due to an error by the organizers, the martial arts tournament was suspended. The tournament was broadcast to a very wide audience, and everyone praised Hyun-soo. The guy accidentally dropped an arrow, and upon closer inspection, the participants realized that he was the very blacksmith who had created the bell in the lands of Castle. Ares' support service was suffering, as they were inundated with questions about the tournament. The assistant turned to Timlid, saying that they had a big problem. The Goyard martial arts tournament was suspended. But the biggest problem was that Barad had summoned Hyun-soo. Timlid hoped that while they were dealing with the tournament and everything else, time would pass. But it was already too late, as Hyun-soo was on his way to the reception hall, and another sleepless night awaited them. Timlid did not understand why the main character was so special. The assistant was curious to see what would happen if Hyun-soo fulfilled Barad's request and reached the maximum level of sympathy. He would master the art of the sword of the King of Swords and become the strongest blacksmith in history. It would not be easy, because everything depended on Barad's free will. The girl had a feeling that he would succeed. The main character did not expect this, but he managed to meet Barad sooner than he thought. The King of Swords noted that the award was usually presented in front of everyone, but they simplified the procedure due to an unforeseen incident. Everyone recognized yesterday's magnificent battle between Hyun-soo and the terrifying golem, even the King of Swords himself. As a reward, the main character was awarded 13,000 gold coins, but he was also concerned about why His Highness was looking for Hyun. The guards called Hyun-soo insolent. No matter how rare a warrior he was, such arrogance could not be tolerated. Although the main character had killed the Great Sword King, he was the very blacksmith Hyun. Barad asked the guards to be quiet, as the guy in front of him was the guest he had been expecting. The main character greeted His Majesty. The Sword King Barad noticed that the boy was in no hurry. The problem with the delay was the difficult journey, but Barad told the blacksmith that he already knew why he had to come. According to Barad, even the best blacksmith in the kingdom, and even the master of the sword tower could not handle this order. Radiating an aura, the Sword King wanted to know why he should trust the main character. Hyun-soo said that he had come to the Sword King believing only in his blacksmithing skills. Barad began to laugh, noting that he really liked the main character's courage. The Sword King asked his servants to bring the materials, as he wanted to bet on Hyun-soo's confidence. The blacksmith was shown 100-year-old cold steel, a special ore that had absorbed cold for 100 years. It was resistant to fire, and had the properties of ice. This mineral was straight out of a martial arts novel. Barad wanted a sword of epic rank or higher, and if Hyun-soo succeeded, he could ask for anything he wanted. But if Hyun-soo disappointed the King of Swords, then he would never set foot on the lands of the Kingdom of Goyard again. The hero was assigned an S-rank task, a royal order. As a reward, the hero would receive a wish, and for failure, he would be exiled. The stakes were high, and Hyun-soo wanted to live up to the Sword King's expectations, hoping that he would not let him down. While the main character was going about his business, he sensed the vice-captain of the Goyard Kingdom's knights, Bella, level 301. Hyun-soo understood that he was a stranger, but the overseer was making him nervous, although he could understand that, because it would be strange if they trusted him right away. Bella asked Hyun-soo to pretend she wasn't there because she noticed how uncomfortable he was. The girl didn't understand who this blacksmith thought he was, because His Majesty had given him a chance. The system informed the main character that someone was at the door. He asked Bella to step out for a moment. It was the landlady. She was delighted to see that Hyun-soo was home at that moment. She had decided to sell the house because her husband had been out of work for a long time, and they needed to make ends meet. Hyun-soo asked the landlady not to apologize, as she had rented him the room cheaper than anyone else, and he had even delayed payment a couple of times. The main character had to move out within 2 weeks. His aunt was very embarrassed to tell him this. Hyun-soo had indeed earned quite a bit of money in Aries. He covered tens of millions in hospital bills, and the purchase of the nearly burned-down smithy cost 330 million. But the guy didn't get around to treating his own burns, and now he didn't know where to go to live. Nell called the main character. She had a great idea for an assignment, so she called him. The guy asked her to call back later because his head was full of other things right now. He said that Barad's assignment was important, but he suddenly needed to move out within 2 weeks. The girl said that she expected 2 main results from this assignment, because the internet was full of news about it. Now everyone was wondering about the champion of the Goyard tournament, because they didn't understand if it was the blacksmith Hyun. The main character was in hiding, but then he would appear and announce the creation of a guild. He received an order for a sword from Barad, one of the most influential characters in Aries. Nell asked the main character to imagine Barad showing off the new sword engraved with Hyun's name. At that moment, its value would skyrocket, and the girl had already said earlier that she would support him. When Hyun-soo returned, Bella was extremely excited. She took his hand and asked why he had returned so late. As it turned out, His Majesty Barad was now trapped in the lair of the flame dragon. The main character did not know where this lair was, adding even more trouble for Bella. The Lair of Flame is the general name for the lands where fire monsters lived. Among them is the dungeon of Ifrit. No one has ever returned alive from there except His Highness Barad. Hyun-soo asked why His Highness would go to the dungeon where he had already been without taking the sword he had ordered. Bella revealed that Barad went there because the object of his revenge was in that dungeon. The Sword King made his way through the dungeon, almost reaching the end, with only the gate left to pass through. But his sword was useless, as the blade had melted in the heat of battle with the demonic creatures. At least his men were able to retreat safely. Even if reinforcements arrived, it would take at least 3 days. Barad realized that he should have waited until the stranger finished the sword. The Sword King regretted that his son, Ban, was no longer alive. Ban would now be about the same age as the stranger Hyun-soo, but he had died a cruel death. Barad sat with his wounded son, asking him why he had come to him without saying a word. Ban thought that if he cleared this dungeon, he would finally become the son his father could be proud of. Apologizing to his father, He said he was too weak. The Sword King was worried about his son, begging him to hang on. Ban's arms fell, and his life slipped away. Barad hugged his son and cried. He should have waited for the main character to finish his sword, but the Sword King did not want to miss Ifrit. The man had waited years for this creature to appear, and this time he couldn't let it get away. Bella told of His Majesty's tragic past. Ever since the prince's death, Barad had tried everything to catch Ifrit, but he never showed himself so easily. This could be Mr. Barad's last chance to catch Ifrit. Bella didn't want to trust a stranger, but if His Highness trusted him, then there must be a reason. Bowing, Bella asked the main character, as a knight of the kingdom of Goyard, to save the king. The main character did not think that Barad had gone through such a thing, but he wanted to justify the urgent task entrusted to him. That day, Hyun-soo also nearly lost everything he had in the fire. If he, like Barad, had lost his family, he would not have been able to move forward. With a new goal of saving the King of Swords, the main character began to hammer the metal. Rumor has it that the heat of Ifrit can melt even unique weapons. This meant that the hero had to forge a weapon of a higher class than unique. Focusing on protecting himself from the flames, his understanding of the century-old cold iron deepened. Hyun-soo activated the blacksmith's soul skill and continued to forge, pouring all his strength into this creation. While forging this blade, the main character immersed himself in the process more deeply than ever before. Passion and determination allowed him to focus completely. He forged Hyun's first legendary sword. Taking it in his hands, the sword blazed with coldness. Hyun-soo finished his incredible creation. The Sword King Barad was fighting at that time, and his opponent clearly dominated, throwing him against the walls. Barad's enemy turned out to be the boss of the Lair of Flames, Ifrit, level 409. The Sword King swung his sword behind his back, shouting that Ifrit had no idea how long the man had been waiting for this battle. The attack successfully hit the creature, but it was not defeated, even when part of its body was torn apart. After a couple of seconds, Ifrit's body regenerated, and he looked at Barad with a sneer. Pointing his blade at the Sword King, Ifrit began to release bursts of fire. The tongues of lava grabbed Barad's broken blade, taking away his only weapon. Ifrit continued to attack the Sword King, but this time he had to flee from the attacks. The monster gathered its strength, striking the ground with its weapon, and a fiery whirlwind appeared around it. Ifrit's flames burned worse than any flint, and they completely engulfed the Sword King. Having endured this blow, the king was practically defeated, falling to one knee and admitting defeat. Ifrit threw his spear at Barad, who could barely stand on his feet. The Sword King was on the verge of death, but before the spear hit, two blades appeared in front of him. Behind him was a wall of ice, and the two swords waited for Barad to take them in his hands. The main character arrived in time and threw the weapons to protect the Sword King. Bella turned to His Highness, asking the man to use these new swords. Barad began to rise. He reached out and took the blade, examining this cold weapon. Hyun's individual sword for Barad was legendary in its rarity, increasing his abilities and granting the man icy skills. With a swing of the sword, the flames immediately died down, and everything began to fade, covered in ice. The Ifrit found himself in a difficult position, his legs frozen in ice, and the flames ceased to burn. While the monster was immobilized, the Sword King rushed forward, declaring that it was all over. With a swing of his sword, Barad struck directly at Ifrit's body, beginning to burn his flames with ice. The powerful blow managed to defeat Ifrit, cutting the monster in two and giving Barad the victory. The exhausted man fell to one knee again, but now he did so having defeated the boss. Something began to happen at the sight of Ifrit's death. A fiery whirlwind appeared in place of his body, and lava bubbled. The main character did not understand what was happening, but Bella revealed that some monsters self-destructed before death. Bella begged His Majesty to leave quickly, as it was dangerous here, but he ordered her not to come near. Looking at the pendant with a photo of his late son, Barad said he wanted to end everything right now. The girl could have helped His Majesty, but he ordered her to stay where she was, leaving her perplexed. Bella stood still, and Hyun-soo began to walk forward, surprising the girl even more with his decision. Activating his emergency divine creation ability, the main character created fire-resistant armor. Hyun-soo went to help the Sword King. Passing through the bright flames, he found himself in front of him. Barad asked him to leave, because he had already done more than was required. Hyun-soo couldn't, because he had come to accompany the king. Barad did not want to leave, because he thought that it was because of him that Ban had left this world. This touched the main character because of his memories, and he asked the king if the owner of the necklace would be happy about this. The king stood up and said that a stranger could not understand this, that no one could understand how he felt. Barad believed that Hyun-soo did not dare to speak about the bitterness of losing a child through his own fault. The main character admitted that he could not understand this pain, but he too had almost lost a loved one. Hyunsu's father was in a coma, and every day he prayed for him to open his eyes, but now he was glad that his father was alive, in any condition. Hyunsu thought that Barad's son would feel the same way. He had to let Ban go. The Sword King finally realized this. He apologized to his son, because his foolish father was wrong. His Majesty had to live, because he had to become a father his son could be proud of. Barad accepted the fact that he should not be a father to be ashamed of, so he decided to leave. Bella noticed the boys and was glad that his Majesty was finally safe. The main character had exhausted his health reserves, and he said he would return soon. After all, strangers never died. The king was finally safe, and he fell to the ground while Bella tried to revive him. Due to the forced exit, the main character's level was lowered by 1, but he was glad he did the right thing. He promised his father that he would move on.